Charlotte's graduation party was held in our backyard in the middle of June, when the sun was still gentle and the breeze still soft. Paper lanterns floated above the garden, white wine chilled in buckets, grilled meat sizzling, and acoustic guitar music drifted gently from the outdoor speakers. Charlotte's friends, our friends, laughter. Everything looked like a photo shoot for a magazine about family happiness. Victoria, my wife, stood in the center of it all, dressed in a modest cream-colored dress, champagne flute in hand, smiling radiantly as if she had just landed a starring role. And maybe she had. I walked into the kitchen to grab more napkins. When I came back out, I saw her phone left on the counter, screen still lit. A message just arrived. "The room's booked, just 2 more days and we'll be free. Sender, T." I hadn't meant to look, but my finger tapped the screen before my mind could stop it. The message thread opened like an indictment, weeks of texts, words of affection, secret rendezvous, hotel photos, escape plans. And then, the final message, "Edward has no idea, he still trusts me, that's the funniest part." I froze, not out of shock, but because I'd suspected, felt it, and yet I still chose to trust, still chose silence. Until now. I looked up. Through the window, I saw Victoria standing close to a tall man, salt and pepper hair, light-colored shirt. He said something. She laughed, that familiar tilt of her head, that gentle touch on his elbow. The way she used to touch me when we first got married. I set the phone down. The wine in my hand had gone warm. I poured it into the sink, poured myself a new glass, but didn't drink. I didn't feel angry, not immediately hurt either. The first sensation was emptiness. A hollow space spreading through my chest, as if I'd stopped breathing and hadn't noticed. What came to mind wasn't the betrayal. It was an image of her from long ago, reading by the window, tea in hand, hair falling softly over her shoulder. A woman I thought I knew entirely. Maybe I never really knew anyone at all. Laughter drifted in from the garden, like it belonged to another world. I stood still, fingers resting on the lip of the glass. The glass was cold. Inside, I was growing cold too. My name is Edward, 51, financial analyst. I work in silence. I live by data. I believe in logic. And I used to believe in love, until everything turned into numbers in my wife's exit strategy spreadsheet. I used to think marriage meant trust, sacrifice, defined roles. I used to step back so Victoria could step forward. I thought silence was maturity. But now I understand, silence can kill a man slowly. 3 weeks ago, I began to take notes. Not to take revenge, but to save myself when the truth finally shattered. And tonight, I know that time has come. I didn't ask Victoria, didn't confront her. There was no conversation that night, nor the following morning. I still brewed her coffee, still asked Charlotte if she wanted waffles, still opened the car door for my wife like nothing had happened. It was the most terrifying silence I've ever chosen. I wasn't trying to catch her. I needed to understand when it began, why, and whether there were signs I'd overlooked. Not to unravel more pain, but to fully grasp what I had lost and how I'd let it slip. 3 days later, I reset the access credentials to our financial systems, something I'd once handed over entirely to Victoria. A small move, enough to confirm what I'd quietly suspected, at least 2 undisclosed sub-accounts linked to a regional bank. Moderate amounts of money withdrawn on a 10-day cycle. Each transfer just under $10,000, neatly avoiding any red flags. I started documenting. I named the folder, Exit Model V3. No one suspected. I still went to work, still replied to emails on time, still talked to Charlotte about her internship plans in New York. Still a father, still a husband. But each night after the house went silent, I sat alone in front of a screen, reviewing transaction logs, comparing timestamps, pulling security footage from the front gate camera. She'd said she had meetings, but the car stayed parked for 3 hours near a lakeside villa, on days with nothing scheduled on the company calendar. I didn't feel jealousy, only coldness. Cold enough to realize years of marriage had taught me how not to feel at all. I started noticing things I'd previously ignored, or more accurately, chosen not to notice. She no longer looked at me for long. Her gaze only skimmed past. The usual "how was work today" felt obligatory, just filler before turning back to her phone. She often smiled quietly while texting, then locked the screen the second I entered the room. At first I told myself I was being paranoid, but the fragments began to form a picture, one I couldn't unsee. She changed her iCloud password, stopped sharing her calendar. Our Amazon Prime account suddenly no longer linked. A strange order arrived: lingerie, a book in Italian, and a fall travel guide for Sicily, all shipped under the name L. Carter. That name had never existed in our household. It felt like an alternate life was being constructed in secret, a new reality in which I had no part. I didn't ask, didn't beg, because there is a humiliation worse than betrayal. It's having to ask for confirmation of something the other person no longer bothers to hide. Instead, I spent my evenings redrawing the financial map. I checked every authorization, who could withdraw, who had access. I laid out the cash flow like I had done for clients preparing for IPOs, every route, every leak, every contingency. This time, the project was myself, and the client, the last person in the house to realize he was being left behind. One evening, Victoria came into the living room and saw me sitting silently on the couch. She asked, "You okay today? You're quiet." I looked at her. For a brief moment, just a breath, I considered telling the truth, that I knew, that I'd seen everything, but instead, I simply smiled. "Just thinking about a new project." She nodded and turned away, as if the answer was enough. As if she'd forgotten that I'm someone who can read data faster than most people finish a sentence. That night marked the beginning of a shift. I started revoking access. Secondary accounts moved. Supplemental credit cards terminated. Every action silent, precise, quiet enough not to trigger alarm, not out of vengeance, just to remove her tools. I said nothing, but I was reclaiming what was mine quietly, strategically, irrevocably. By the time she'd notice, it would already be over. I used to think we were a team. When Victoria left her job at the law firm to pursue her MBA, I was the first to say, "Go for it, I'll handle the rest." The rest was everything she left behind: rent, bills, her old student loans, and Charlotte, who was only 3 at the time, often waking up in the middle of the night with fevers. I didn't complain. I believed that love didn't require precise fairness, only presence when the other person needed to move forward. I passed on my first promotion to stay home with our daughter, worked double shifts that fall to make up the income gap. When Victoria started her first company, I was the one who co-signed the loan, investing my retirement savings into her first funding round, without ever asking to be paid back. I thought that's how a man loved his wife. We had plans: a little lake house, a coffee shop she'd design herself, family trips once Charlotte got older. I believed, without saying it, that if I stayed silent long enough, if I did my part well enough, everything would stay steady, grounded, intact. But perhaps the very thing I became, the steady pillar, was what wore itself down unnoticed. I don't remember exactly when we stopped hugging before bed. I don't recall the last time Victoria asked, "Are you okay?" Maybe it was after one of those late nights when she came home and said, "I'm tired, I'll sleep first." Just one sentence, but after that, I ate more dinners alone, slept more nights alone. She laughed more at her phone and less with me. She talked about her coworkers but never asked about my day. I didn't ask questions, not because I didn't know, but because I was afraid. Afraid that the answers would break apart what little I still believed was real. I wasn't naive. I was desperate to keep believing. One afternoon, I sat in the car waiting for her outside a seminar. She didn't come out alone. Walking beside her was a man I didn't recognize. He leaned in and said something that made her laugh. His hand lightly touched her back, casually. intimately. She didn't look around, had no idea I was less than 20 meters away, lights off, engine silent. I didn't take photos, didn't follow. I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, watching what looked like a different woman, wearing the face of someone I used to know. That night I pulled out an old notebook, a journal I used to keep in our early years. Scattered entries, a line about Charlotte, a note about a rainy morning. One page made me stop. She said she feels more confident because I'm always behind her. Maybe that's my role, silent support. I paused at the word silent. Back then, I believed silence was a virtue, that men should be steady as stone, no complaints, no reactions, no wounds on display. But now I understand. That same silence made it easy for her to erase me from her life without ever pushing. I stepped out of the center of everything, quietly, willingly, and eventually disappeared from the frame. I began to ask myself, had I loved her or the version of her I'd constructed in my head? Had I trusted her or just chosen to be lied to so I wouldn't have to confront change? Had I sacrificed or was I just too afraid to ask for what I actually deserved? These questions didn't need answers from her. They answered themselves, in the quiet of a life I'd built on assumptions. And in that stillness, for the first time in years, I could hear my heart beating. Not for anyone else, just for me. I don't know the exact moment love died in this marriage, but I know the precise second I stopped trying to save it. And that's when I started saving myself. Once I began assembling the details, the pattern emerged quickly. Clean, complete, and mercilessly logical. I printed statements from the past 3 months. The withdrawal amounts weren't large, but they were consistent. Every 10 days, always under 10,000, just enough to avoid automated alerts. The recipient, an anonymous account tied to a regional bank. I didn't need to know the name. The purpose was obvious. I checked Victoria's location history, an iCloud feature she'd forgotten to disable years ago. At least 4 data points matched. Same address, same time, same day of the week. A month-to-month rental apartment 20 minutes from our home. I didn't need confirmation, but I kept going, not because I still questioned her, but because I needed to close the file properly. I called Michael, an old friend who used to work in forensic accounting. I asked him to trace suspicious transaction flows, reimbursements from secondary credit cards, routed through temporary wallets consolidated under a third-party alias. His report came back clean, detailed, and damning. Money had been moving quietly, cleverly, into something that had no trace in our shared asset portfolio. I stored everything. I didn't say a word. I pulled footage from our front gate camera. There were nights she said she was on business trips but returned close to midnight with just a canvas bag. No laptop, no materials. I cross-referenced phone records. Deleted messages were gone, but the number logs remained. One particular number showed up regularly, unlisted, always short calls, never at random hours. I saved the number. I didn't need to know who T was. I only needed to confirm that Victoria had been the one maintaining the connection. Each night, I updated a few more lines in my Exit Model V3 spreadsheet. I logged every risk, outlined potential triggers. I drafted contingency scenarios. If she tried to move assets, how I'd intercept. If she filed first, which protections I'd activate. I reached out discreetly to a family lawyer and requested a draft for asset isolation. I didn't want revenge, but I refused to be the last one to know and the only one unprepared. Victoria noticed nothing. She still behaved as if everything was in her favor. She still asked what I wanted for dinner, still suggested a family vacation when Charlotte's break came around, still left post-it notes on the kitchen counter, running late, don't wait up. Part of me wanted to pretend that everything was still salvageable, but I knew I'd pretended long enough. One night I stood outside our bedroom door watching her sleep. The warm glow from the bedside lamp brushed her profile, peaceful, almost delicate. I felt no rage, no pain anymore, just a kind of hollowness, not the shape of what was lost, but the echo of what would never return. The next morning I opened my email, typed exactly 7 words, "Activate contingency plan number 2, and hit send. I didn't choose confrontation. I didn't choose to win her back. I chose timing, the same way any good investor pulls out before a market collapse. I didn't know how Victoria would respond. I didn't need to, because for the first time in a long while, I was the one in control. And this time I was ready for whatever came next. I chose Saturday. Charlotte had flown out the day before to begin her internship. The house felt bigger than usual, quieter, no more quick footsteps along the hallway, no more bursts of music from her room, just the two of us, and a silence too full to ignore. Victoria was in the kitchen. She was slicing fruit, earbuds in, lightly humming along to a song. Morning light filtered through the curtain and landed across her nose like a painter's brushstroke. To a stranger walking in, it would have looked like an ordinary, peaceful morning in a perfectly functioning home. I walked in. In my hand was an envelope. "What's that?" she asked. "Just read it," I said. I placed it on the dining table. I didn't sit down. I didn't change my expression. I stood there like someone waiting for a contract to be enforced. She wiped her hands, pulled out a chair, sat down. Her fingers slid under the flap. Her eyes scanned the first page, then picked up speed. When she reached the flagged transaction logs and calendar screenshots, her eyes began to stall. On the 5th sheet, I heard her inhale, shallow, sharp. "Edward, what is this?" I took a seat across from her, fingers interlocked. Calm. "I'm doing what you never expected me to, laying everything out on the table, like you once did, only this time, you're not the only one who saw it coming." She set the papers down, lifted her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. You didn't mean to, but you did, and worse, you believed I'd never find out." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You once told me I was too kind, too quiet, too easy to predict. You weren't wrong. I lived like a ghost in this house for years, but you forgot something. That silence wasn't stupidity. It was love, the kind that didn't want to destroy what we had." She turned her head, avoiding my eyes. "What do you want, Edward?" I stood up, retrieved a second folder, laid it beside the first. "It's not about what I want. It's about what I've prepared." Inside were full records, revoked financial authorizations, frozen joint credit cards, initiated audits for shared assets. I paused, then added, "And you must have forgotten, our prenuptial agreement from 2017 is still valid, including the infidelity clause." She froze. Her face paled. The control in her posture began to slip. I continued. "The documents have been filed, the evidence verified, 5 months' worth of hidden transactions, calendar mismatches, deleted texts, location pings, they've all been logged. This isn't guesswork, this is math." She didn't speak. Her hand trembled slightly on the table, fingernails lightly scraped the oak surface, not out of rage, but uncertainty. I knew that movement. I'd made it once myself, trying to hold on to something I knew was gone. What if I said it wasn't planned, that I never meant for it to become what it became? Then I'd say, I don't need to hear that anymore. We sat in silence, not out of avoidance, but because there was nothing left to defend. All the data was already there, all the conclusions written. She finally rose, not with anger, just defeat. "How long have you known?" "Since the moment I realized I was no longer included in any of your future plans." That night, she didn't return to our room. I heard the suitcase wheels drag softly across the hallway floor. The door clicked shut gently, like she didn't want to break something that had already shattered. I didn't follow. I didn't ask where she went. I sat at my desk, opened the Exit Model V3 spreadsheet, and filled in the final cell, emotional dependency, cleared. The next morning I woke up early, made my own coffee, fried eggs. One plate of pastries sat untouched. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counter, then sat at the table, not out of routine, but out of resolution. I thought about what I'd lost: a wife, a narrative, a belief in permanence. But then I thought about what I'd regained: clarity, boundaries, a timely end. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel proud. I simply felt present for the first time in a long, long while. Not as her husband, not as someone's shadow, just as Edward, a man who had finally chosen to stop being silent. I no longer dream about Victoria, not out of hatred, simply because she no longer exists in the empty spaces I used to fill with memory. My sleep is no longer interrupted by invisible collisions, no more waking in the dark, wondering if what I just felt was a loss, or just the silence finally settling in. I sleep through the night now. I wake early, brew coffee quietly without checking anyone else's mug. I eat breakfast alone, as I had done for many months toward the end. But this time, it's not abandonment. It's solitude, chosen and clean. The day after she left, I reorganized my office, took down photos that had hung too long. One was from our wedding, sunny skies over Santa Barbara, where we once believed that love, if deep enough, could simplify everything. I didn't throw it away. I didn't burn it. I put it in a box and labeled it, "No longer for display." Some memories aren't for erasing. They're just not meant to be revisited daily. I returned to habits I'd abandoned: early morning walks around the lake, reading books not related to work, sitting at the coffee shop I used to frequent, one Victoria never liked. She once called it too loud and cramped. I went back anyway, ordered the same drink I always had, and for the first time in a long time I could actually taste it. We didn't contact each other anymore. Everything was channeled through lawyers, short, emotionless. She didn't call. I didn't either. One day my assistant brought me a plain envelope with no sender listed. Inside was a folded note, handwritten, unsigned. "If you ever truly loved me, please don't make Charlotte see me as the villain." I read it once, then tucked it into a drawer without response. No anger, no sorrow, just a recognition of the woman she still was, one who cared more about how she was seen than what she had done. Charlotte didn't ask much. She was more grown up than we'd realized. She looked at me one evening, then said, "I hope you don't lose yourself because of this, Dad." I replied, "Ben, I already did, but I've found myself again." A month later, the divorce was finalized. No lawsuits, no public scenes, no messy fallout, just two names, two signatures, and a line on a legal document that read, "Resolved." I didn't celebrate, I didn't grieve, I just sat down and wrote myself an email. "Congratulations, you've done everything she thought you never could." I didn't send it, just saved it in drafts. As a reminder, I opened old projects I had abandoned. One was a cash flow tool for small businesses, a passion I gave up when Victoria started her company. I reopened the code. It was messy, outdated, but I didn't mind. I just wanted to start building again. Not for her, not to prove anything, just for me. I stopped checking up on her. No social media, no asking around, no Googling her name, not because I stopped caring, but because I knew. The more I knew, the slower I would move on. One night I dreamed I was sitting in a parked car. It was raining. I had no destination, but I remember the feeling in my chest. Calm, unhurried, free. When I woke, the clock read 4:38 a.m. I turned on the lamp, opened my laptop, and deleted the file. Exit Model V3. No hesitation, no backup, because I no longer needed an exit. I had already left. There's a question people often ask those who've been through a divorce. If you could go back, would you choose differently? I've thought about it often, and my answer is this: I'd choose it all again, including the ending. Not because I enjoyed what happened, but because nothing hurts more than staying in a place where the other person already walked away long ago. Today, I don't live in the past. I don't wait for someone to return. Not out of strength, not to appear okay, but because I finally understand. Not everyone who leaves is a traitor, and not everyone who stays still loves you.